Welcome to the premiere of the Beer Connoisseurs Beer Buyers Club and Gourmet Brewing. This is going to be a live stream and podcast series, and this new collaboration will provide some amazing opportunities to hear from great brewers talk about some really awesome beer. I'm your host, Doug Piper, and I want you to know how much I appreciate you allowing me to join you in growing our beverage skills together. I'm a certified Cicerone and a certified BJCP beer and mead judge, and I'm working on advanced ranks. Each week, we'll do another brewer-led guided tasting from a selection of the previous week's Beer Buyers Club offering, which will conveniently arrive in the mail well in time from the live stream. So I see we've got some folks from Charlotte, Mark from Charlotte, John in Michigan. Wow, we've got quite a crowd here. I really appreciate everyone being here on a Friday. I know this is a busy time. For those of you unfamiliar with Gourmet Brewing, we provide content related to brewing and enjoying the very best in fine beverages. So if you would click the green follow button, I think it's up there maybe in the upper right corner, you'll be notified of new live stream events and help draw in more speakers. Please do it. It really does help. Plus, it gets you notified of future events. Now, our partner with this is the Beer Connoisseur. The Beer Connoisseur is one of the highest read and most trusted sources of beer knowledge worldwide, with over 8 million readers. Your Beer Buyers Club provides an opportunity to buy highly rated and sought-after beers through our partner, Tavour. And Tavour is spelled T-A-V-O-U-R. The Tavour app is available in both the Apple and Android version and allows members to purchase these unique beers which are delivered to your home. Hopefully, your state is one of the 24 that Tavour can ship to. We'll put a link in the chat. And there's also a special offer I'll share at the end of the program. I'm glad you're here. Whether you participate in the Beer Buyers Club or not, I hope you'll grab a beer and learn with the rest of us from the brewers themselves. So again, we see Hop Barley from Boulder. And Michael asked where I'm broadcasting today. So Mark, you'll have to touch on that in just a moment. Actually, this is one of the breweries and the tap rooms that we'll be talking to today, the folks at Drekker. Now, before we move to the main presentation, there's just a few quick logistical items I'd like to go through. If the webinar is not playing correctly, refreshing your browser window fixes almost everything. But if you're having issues, you can reduce the resolution by clicking on the little gear symbol in the lower right corner of your screen. Also, I'd encourage you to click on the Ask a Question button if you would like to ask a question to the brewers, which we'll do in the second half. And also, we have a poll, and that really helps the speakers with what we're doing. I love it when you're writing there in the chat. It gives us an idea of kind of what's going on there with you, and especially if we have anything that's not going quite right, we'll maybe catch that. But don't put questions in the chat. We'll save that for the Ask a Question field. So, gentlemen, I'd like to bring you all up here on screen, and hopefully the internet will cooperate with us. I want to welcome you all to the Beer Connoisseur Beer Buyers Club guided tasting, live stream, and podcast. Today we have Mark Bjornstad. Mark is the co-founder and president of Drekker Brewing and located in Fargo, North Dakota. Mark practices anesthesiology in his day job and has a background in biochemistry and microbiology. He apprenticed at Colorado Boy Brew Pub prior to opening Drekker Brewing in 2014. We also have Chris Shields of Rhinegeist Brewery in Cincinnati, Ohio. Chris is an advanced Cicerone, a certified BJCP beer judge, and he has his master's in biological science. So, boy, I feel like we got some really sharp people here today. So, welcome everyone. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on here. This is kind of a fun new way to share beer with people, and I think we're all taking advantage of the current situation and connecting in new ways. So this is a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
And Chris, how about you?
Yeah, absolutely. This is as Mark said, we're kind of figuring everything out these days. So, um, I'm down here in my basement command center, but really looking forward to sharing some beer with everybody.
And my Cicerone journey was one of the reasons that I started this. So it'll be really interesting to hear you do what I had hoped I could participate one day, to have someone like you unpack, and you're being a brewer, unpack actually one of your beers in a good Cicerone way. So that will be a lot of fun. Well, Chris, we're actually going to start with you and your beer. Now, I enjoy flavorful, refreshing beers, especially as we approach summer. So, what's your favorite aspect of Zango?
Yeah, I mean, you really kind of hit the nail on the head with this. Zango is, I'm going to crack mine, need some talking juice. But Zango is part of our fruited ales series, which is, they're, in all honesty, they're relatively similar to Graf. They are Grafs. If anyone is familiar with that term, it's sort of a.
Do you mind defining it a little more?
It's a funny. It's not fun. I mean, it is funny to me. It's something that homebrewers really kind of pioneered the terminology. It is a it comes from actually Stephen King's Dark Tower series. As surprising as that may be, Graf was or is the beverage of choice in that fiction. And it is described as a blend of malt and apple juice fermented to varying strengths. So for us, we also make cider. We're able to do that in Ohio, and we have a wine license to be able to do that, obviously. But one of the things that means is we have a lot of apple juice at the brewery. So we started kind of playing around with things and doing some co-fermentations. So the very first one we did was something called Bubbles, which is still by far our most popular. We do that one year round. But we've started a sort of a seasonal rotation, and Zango is our current version. And it's Zango, it's mango and tangerine. So to me, that's very sort of easing into spring and summer, that sort of tropical citrus blend. But it shares a lot of characteristics with cider, and that's because the base fermentation is actually has a fair amount of apple juice. Call it 30% or so. It sort of depends on how you slice the fermentable sugar, I suppose, because it's also back sweetened with fruit juice. That's where the tangerine and mango comes in. But we basically make this with a pretty neutral or approachable grain bill, and then add a bunch of that runs through the brew house as normal, and we get that wort into a fermenter, and then we add apple juice and ferment pretty much as normal. Given all that fructose, that highly fermentable fruit sugar, the beer dries out, very, very dry, bone dry. And then we add in other fruit, in this case, the mango and tangerine, as back sweetening. And what you get, for those that are drinking along at home, I've been very impressed with Zango, the way this turned out. The aroma is just killer. It's all fruit. I mean, tangerine is such a bright citrus flavor, but it just leaps out of the glass. Yeah, I mean, we ferment this with our standard. It's our house ale strain, same yeast that we use for the majority of our ales. There's some really nice fruit there's a little bit of haze, and obviously something that has a lot of fruit juice in it, with all that pectin, tends to have a lot of haze. But this is just to me, as you said, it's sort of it's leading right into warm weather. I think of citrus fruits as sort of that end of winter, right? The blood oranges and the caracara oranges and tangerines and everything is getting ripe, and it's like you're just ready to get outside. And then with the mango, full disclosure, I'm generally not a huge mango fan. To me, it's just sort of generic tropical flavor, which, I mean, maybe it is in the US and in my world, but it adds a nice balance to that citrus. So you end up with just this tease of warmer weather. Here in Cincinnati, we actually had a beautiful day today. It was like mid to high 60s and sunny. So perfect for spring. And then I also think that just the complexity of the juice, and also from the apple. The apple is pretty fully fermented out, but you get some nice floral. I get sort of elderflower, apple blossom kind of aroma off of this. And then like a tangerine oil. And then on mouthfeel, it's not too aggressive. This is 5%, so it's very drinkable. It's not. There's some acidity, but it's not. I wouldn't consider it like a sour beer. There's some fruit acidity there, but no bacteria or anything like that contributing to acidity. And with that, a little bit of residual sweetness, it brings some nice mouthfeel. I don't know if that was maybe overkill.
No, I think it was perfect. I think that's exactly the kind of thing we need to hear from your experience, but especially with your advanced Cicerone background. I know we have some other Cicerones here joining us, and probably some that are aspiring to various levels of Cicerone. So this was perfect. Well, let's bring Mark on, because Mark might have a question. We made him really thirsty as he's been watching all this. Well, Mark, did we drive you crazy?
No, I love hearing about other breweries and how they come up with their beers, and then how they appreciate their beers. I think that's always a fun way to see how people approach their beers, and then what they pull out of them. Having somebody walk through a tasting that both was intimately involved with the creation and concept, and then the enjoyment of it, you get some really unique tasting guidance with that. So thank you.
Well, but as a brewer, you might have a good question that you would like to ask Chris.
One thing, being a cidery as well as a brewery, I know you kind of touched at it. Do you ever switch yeast strains depending on fruits that you're using, or cross your ale and cider strains at all to produce different flavors when in the grafts or in regular beers?
Yeah, it's so when we actually use ale yeast to ferment all of our ciders. When we were developing that was one of the projects I worked on when I first joined Rhinegeist. Actually, I made the mistake of admitting that I had homebrewed cider before, so all of a sudden I was in charge of developing the cider program. I'm sure you know how that goes.
Yep.
But we did a ton of experiments on different yeast strains, and we're using juice. We're not pressing apples. We don't have the space. And what we found is that it's actually a English ale yeast that we use. And whereas normally English ale strains tend to leave some residual sugar in beer, when you use them in a fruit fermentation, all that sugar is so fermentable. So it still dries everything way out. I think sometimes, and I certainly did this when I was homebrewing, when I was making cider, I wanted it to be dry. And so I would say, okay, I got to use like a Saison strain or a wine strain, something that's going to really dry this out. When I got to experimenting, everything dried it out because it's all simple sugar. They just don't have those starches and the dextrins in the apple juice. So we were really able to focus on something for our ciders. We wanted something very clean and approachable. I say, I would say we make beer style ciders, not wine style ciders. Our ciders are, 6-packs, right? So they're that beer price point and kind of beer approachability. We've been talking a little bit about kind of playing around with some. We do some wild and sour beers, but we haven't really played too much in the wild and sour cider area. We have one other that's technically a graph as well. That's a kind of a co-ferment that we've used a bunch of Brett, like 6 or 8 strains. But that's really our only foray into the wild world with these. But yeah, we sort of, to very long-windedly answer your question, we like I said, the fruited ales, we use our house ale strain. We haven't played around too much, but it's something that at least for us, we don't generally have too many strains bouncing around the brewery at one time. So for something like this, that's a decent seasonal run for us. And it's hard to repitch. The one downside to fermenting through all that fruit with ale yeast is you're burning through all the yeast nutrient. So the yeast isn't super happy after that. So we want to use something that we already have in house, because growing up a new pitch for every batch would be arguably cost prohibitive, probably. But yeah,
sure.
Great question, though.
Well, John says we're making him thirsty. So, Mark, you haven't had one yet, and I'd like to join you. Chris, will you hang around while
Absolutely.
we kind of zero in on Mark's beer for just a minute? Awesome. Okay. So while you're talking about that, Mark, I'm going to try and get this on the overhead, because I think you got a really unique label there. So can you tell me a little bit about this wild artwork?
I think all of our artwork is kind of wild. We're really inspired to challenge people through our beer, whether that's to think about the beer or the unique ingredients or the presentation or brewing technique. And then we want to continue that same mission and philosophy on the outside of the can. We want to make people dig in there for Easter eggs and look at what we're trying to show off there. And so all of our artwork is pretty, I would say, 90s skateboard deck, maybe mashup doodles. And for this beer, Toon Dip, this is a dip hopped, double dry hopped, double IPA with quake yeast. And in that dip hopping technique, we couldn't get over that idea of the Toon Dip from Roger Rabbit, how they killed the cartoons, or how Judge Doom would kill the cartoons. And so we brought that into what we thought it would have looked like if Roger Rabbit had to take a dip on the label there. So that's where the artwork idea comes from. So in this beer, one thing I think that was talked about a lot is it's a quake double IPA. We use a lot of quake yeast strains for several of our beers. It's such a fun yeast and ingredient. Another element to add some depth and variety to our IPA portfolio. And then also in this one, we did this beer in collaboration with our friends at Fair State Brewing Company in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And we wanted to combine two really fun techniques where we were playing around with the biotransformation and unique hop accentuation flavors that quake yeast presents to a beer, and then also start our technique and experiments into a Japanese idea, which is called dip hopping. And the idea is pretty loose around dip hopping, but generally what you're trying to do is allow the wort to have some contact time in the fermenter, or after cooling with the hops, before there's yeast pitched into it. And this was our first experiment with this when the temperature that we do that at, we say after cooling, but really how cool was one of the ideas. And we wanted to pair it with quake yeast, since this would be a hot fermented beer. We wanted to play around with the higher end of dip hopping. So what we do is we take about 10% of the total batch volume, and about 10 minutes into the boil, we send that through the whirlpool and heat-X into the fermenter, and we let it run into the fermenter at about 160 degrees. And then we added what would have been the entire whirlpool addition of hops to that. And so we used a 1-to-1-to-1 blend of Citra Mosaic and El Dorado at about a half a pound per barrel. And we let that sit, just the wort and the hops, in the fermenter at 160 degrees while the rest of the beer finished, which was about an hour. And that does some really strange things that I don't think any of us really fully understand yet, to some of the hop oils and hop compounds. Most notably, our Mosaic and Citra, much like everything, is really high in myrcene content. And this technique seems to allow you to gas off some of the myrcene. And if you smell, we have to leave a blow-off pressure on the tank as this is going. And if you smell that, the aroma is just pure cut grass. So we're getting rid of all of that raw, grassy, kind of generic hoppy flavor. And the hope was that would let some of the other, maybe lower level, oils in the hops shine through. And then we could present a really unique biotransformation profile to the quake yeast. The strain we use of quake is Voss, or Sigmund's Voss. That's the strain that we fell in love with first. My philosophy on quake strains, or really any yeast strain in an IPA, is really to try and accentuate and play with the hops rather than produce a competing flavor. So when I'm looking for an ester profile in a yeast strain, I have a much bigger preference for like a London Ale strain rather than like a Vermont or Conan strain, where I love the flavor that comes off of Conan, but sometimes depending on the hops you're using, Conan might be producing mango and you're driving up an orange or citrus flavor, and they don't quite play together. Where an English ale strain always just seemed to accentuate the hop profile you did rather than compete with it. And that's what we really felt about Sigmund's Voss compared to something like Hornindal, which is very pineapple-y, tropical, fruity, and it's a great flavor. But we want to make that yeast blow up the hop flavor that we want to design, not necessarily compete with it. So Sigmund's Voss, as that's fermenting in the brewery, the whole brewery smells like essential orange oil, and that's it's incredibly potent. And then we can kind of continue with that citrus orange notes, or we can push that in a different direction with whatever we do with the dry hopping. And so with this beer, with our Citra Mosaic and El Dorado, we really wanted to pull up that just rich, oily orange content. And that's what I notice about this beer more than other quake beers as we've done, is we really pulled up that deep and complex orange depth to it.
Yeah, and it's so smooth, Mark. I mean, most double IPAs I found are frankly a little off-putting for the IBUs that people try and get them up to. But this just has a refreshing, bitterness to it, and it's just juicy, and it reminds me when my wife squeezes oranges and grapefruits in the kitchen. When you walk in there, I mean, just fill the room when I open the can. It's phenomenal what kind of aromas come off this thing.
There's actually that, I think you only get it from fresh squeezed orange, where you have that floral orange flavor to it.
Yeah.
And that really comes through with this. And I think that some of that is the biotransformation characteristics that happen, where we get to play up that rose petal and linalool notes in there. So, and like you said, the smoothness to it. We actually, the way we do our hopping, we don't add a lot of hops on the hot side. It's mostly whirlpool, and then we're really building that hop profile through dry hopping techniques, and where we're not playing with bitterness, but we're playing with aroma and characteristics and flavor. And to us, with the malt bill that we choose, we actually like the smoothness and juiciness of our double IPAs more than even a regular IPA or lower alcohol, because with that increased body, we get to create kind of a palate carrier for that hop juice that it seems to spread and kind of sit and has that silky, pillowy note on there. In the malt bill for this beer, we use a combination of spelt, which is a ancient grain similar to wheat, which I think kind of has a nutty, less tangy flavor than regular white wheat, and then a combination of flaked and oat malt as well. And that's to build that kind of little bit thick but fluffy and silky mouth character, and it, like you said, it really carries that idea of juice forward. And I'd say this is a 9.2% alcohol, and there's no real hot burn to it. It's really just that nice, bright, and oily orange and citrus character to it.
Well, that is a phenomenal. I mean, the aromatics alone are worth it. I mean, it's just awesome when you open it up. Reminds me when I visit the hop rooms at some of the breweries, because
Sure.
Wow, it is phenomenal. Well, let's bring Chris up because he might have some questions, and then we're going to move into everyone else's questions momentarily. Looks like we've got about 5 there, but before we do, John says the sharpness is due to the alcohol. Now, I think he was touching on maybe my comment that most double IPAs I found a little off-putting, but this is a double IPA that is not particularly off-putting at all in bitterness. Can you talk to John's comment there?
Sure. Yeah, I think the sharpness of a normal double IPA will be both the bitterness and some alcohol burn that's normal in there. In a traditional American double IPA, you want a malt bill that's actually crisper and cleaner. It doesn't produce too much heaviness. Where in ours, we're actually building up that soft and fluffiness to it. And one of the other aspects that I think helps these beers, which is kind of paradoxical to that traditional thing, is Quikeys tend to end at a final pH that's a little bit lower than a normal ale strain, where normally a lower finishing acidity or a higher finishing acidity creates a sharpness to it. We've found that as long as there's not any bittering hops in that beer, it actually produces a softer and juicier characteristic, and it helps us get rid of some of the hop burn. That it actually might help us drop that lower pH helps us drop some of the hop particles out of the beer a little faster. So this beer finishes in like the low 4s for a pH rather than like mid 4s as a normal ale strain. And I think that also, like in a normal double IPA, that would produce some sharpness, that lower pH. But here, because there's no bittering hops to it, it actually helps produce that juicier flavor where you need a little bit of acidity to create that similar orange juice note.
Well, my compliments to you. So delicious beer. Now, I know Chris might have a hard question for you since you had a pretty good one for him.
Yeah, I was just sort of course, somewhat curious about the logistics of it. I'm not super familiar with dip hopping, and that's fascinating to me. I see how that brings together a lot of sort of ideas and concepts from other hopping techniques, and it makes me think about I don't know, like are you going in like you preloading the fermenter with the hops in order to reduce oxygen, basically, or and then just knocking out right on top of those hops? Is that kind of?
Yeah. So like I said, we used about a half a pound per barrel in the total dose for this one, and all of those hops got loaded into the fermenter, and then as soon as we hit a boil, we let that roll for about 10 minutes, and then we knocked out roughly 10% of the final volume. So it was about maybe each batch we knocked into that. We were doing 30-barrel tanks of it, so we put about 3 to 5 barrels into the tank and let that sit at 160 degrees, and that's an unpurged tank. So we're not so worried about DO at that level because we're going to oxygenate the next wort that comes into it. Really what we want to do is gas off that myrcene and then start to, at this 160 degrees, we want some of those hop oils to become soluble, and then and those glycoside compounds to become available for the yeast to hopefully biotransform once we get in there. So the idea really is that, like, with our beers that are our hops that are crazy high in myrcene content, to get some of that off, and then let the geraniol and humulene levels that are decent, but they're always going to be playing backup singer, to let those shine through and see what that produced on this beer.
Well, Mark, let me ask you a little bit about the room I'm in. We're having to do virtual travel right now while we can't go anywhere. But what a phenomenal looking tap room! Can you just touch on it?
Yeah, I mean, we call it Brewhalla. It's our Viking Valhalla, heaven on earth. This is a building that it's a 140-year-old railroad maintenance building. It was actually the original building that we wanted to put our brewery in when we first opened about 6 years ago. But it was vacant and dilapidated, and I mean, if it had been tried to be used, it would have been condemned. And we had the just really amazing opportunity to resurrect this building and bring it back to life in the image that we thought we wanted our brewery to be. So you can see all of, like, the natural wood and skylights are just it's such an inspiring and energizing space to be in. And so our brewery is right there in the middle. The brew house is way in the back up against all of our west windows, so we get some pretty amazing sunsets just shining through there. And it was a really fun project to kind of bring this building back to life, and it's an absolute pleasure to share it with people. And we, right now it's shut down, but we're just eagerly awaiting that data to kind of bring our back in and breathe some life in that building.
Well, it gives us something to look forward to.
Yeah,
and I appreciate you sharing such a phenomenal picture there. So as we wrap up before we transition, looks like we've got 9 questions rolling in, and we'll probably have some more. Do you want to touch on some things going on with the brewery, Mark? And then Chris, we will move into you to hear a little bit more about Rhinegeist before we transition to the questions.
Yeah, I think the biggest things going on with us is we're always in a continued experimentation or trying to come up with, new flavor concepts that we want to, create and reimagine in a beer. So we're constantly expanding. We're looking at trying to do a big tank expansion right now that would let us produce some of the beers that we are trying to make in a little bit way, and then also feed demand. Yesterday was a big beer release day for us, and it's fun. We released a beer called Chonk, which is a heavily fruited sour that we do. And Chonk is we call it a space sour. And this one was strawberry and dark chocolate. It's essentially like a carbonated milkshake. And we sold off
a carbonated milkshake. Wait a minute.
Yeah.
But I mean, chocolate, vanilla. What are we talking about?
It's about 120 pounds per barrel of beer strawberry that goes into it, and then dark chocolate, vanilla, lactose, sugar. So we released that beer yesterday, and not even having it on tap and being in some sort of pandemic shutdown, we sold out of it yesterday. So we're doing expansions and trying to keep up with demand, and we're thankful for just a community that really just comes out and supports the heck out of us, and we're having fun. So we're absolutely living our dream right now, and it's fun to even look at that picture of the brewery. I don't get to take that view too often, and we just sometimes step back and pinch ourselves because this is a really fun time to be making beer, and it's a fun time for us to be making beer.
Much less to see me in the middle of it. Mark, we have lost your camera, so I'm going to switch over to Chris and get him to tell us a little bit more about Rhinegeist. And look, I hope you can get your camera back momentarily.
Yeah, what a beautiful tap room. I think I'm going to have to make my way up to Fargo. But it was cool hearing that story. Breweries have sort of captured and brought new life into so many old buildings. We're in the same situation in Cincinnati. We're in a neighborhood called Over the Rhine, and we're in a pre-prohibition. Actually, a part of our building was actually a pre-prohibition brewery. It was a bottling facility for one of the large German lager breweries. Before the old mess of prohibition, but we have a somewhat similar, a little bit more industrial, not as much wood and warmth, but high ceilings and just big open space, and it's really fun to. We have people come in and bring their families, and kids are running around and playing bean bags, and we do indoor wiffle ball and dodgeball.
Hop Harley says you have a beautiful tap room.
Oh, well, thank you. We love it. I mean, it's one of those any given day, sort of in that happy hour window, you're likely to find a crew of Rhinegeist employees just enjoying the fruits of our labor, as it were, and spending time in the tap room. It's really great to be part of Cincinnati and Ohio and really all of our markets in the Midwest. We've seen a lot of growth, and we understand the love that came from the Midwest to kind of put us there. And we hope that having a nice tap room and a place for people to come gather makes them happy to come be a part of what we're doing, because we certainly couldn't do it.
An amazing rooftop bar.
We do. We actually, I just heard a story from our founders the other day that I hadn't heard before. Of they were kind of walking around the building. We're about to be 7 years old. So in craft brewing, we're like this weird, old guy almost. I've been doing this long enough that I think of,
Careful.
but I mean, for, the average craft brewery is less than 4 years old. The vast majority of them are much younger than us. But to me, I think of, Sierra Nevada and New Belgium and Allagash and Dogfish Head and all these. I'm from North Carolina, so I grew up with Highlands and Foothills and all these places, and to be working at a place that now even or here in Ohio, Great Lakes, they've been around for so much longer than us, but still so many breweries are newer. But it was interesting to see our owners talking about the building of the rooftop. They were apparently kind of wandering through our building, and we're looking at how can we and it was a beautiful day. I wish we could go out and maybe over here we could build a rooftop. And they were like, wait, what's up there? And just kind of climbed up to a different part of the roof. And we're like, oh, this is where the rooftop has to be. And that's one of the great things about, our
Mark's word was amazing.
It's pretty cool. I don't know. I know Andrew is in the chat. Maybe he can, he's one of our social media wizards. Maybe he can, drop a link to the rooftop. But it is cool. I mean, we're in the middle of a hundreds of years old downtown Cincinnati. So you can be on a rooftop and look out on all these historic buildings, some old historic breweries. You can see Sam Adams. But it's a beautiful view of our downtown. And we have a beautiful downtown.
Well, let's transition to the questions. And just to kind of let everybody know how that works, if you're unfamiliar with it, this will be the main part of our presentation. We've gone through our two beers and we've kind of got it unpacked from the brewers themselves, which just, I think, is fantastic. Thank you, gentlemen. That's, I think, just the best part of this. But
yeah, Mark made me go grab another beer talking about his his IPA.
The chance to ask a brewer a question is a great privilege. And so you can ask your question. And if you need to run, because I know some of you have been on here for maybe even more than 40 minutes, you'll still get the answer whether you're live or not. And you can click on a link and it'll take you right to it. So we appreciate your time, but we hope everyone will stay. So Chris, you and Mark can both stay, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's jump into the questions. I'll try and direct them to the right person. Oh, it looks like a lot of folks have already done that. Thank you so much. All right. So, Mark, you have the first question. Which Kvike yeast are you using to ferment Toon Dip? And why did you select that particular one?
I think I touched a little bit on that in my meandering explanation of the beer, but we use Voss Kvike for all of our Kvike beers. That's just turned out to be our favorite. So I love, like I said, I love how it accentuates and it lifts up the hop profile that we're usually trying to create without being too competitive. Compared to something like Hornindal, which is, brightly tropical, and I absolutely love Kvike beers that are brewed at that. But I think that's a Kvike strain that has to be applied specifically with a hop pairing to make sure that those play well together. And I kind of like each ingredient to play its part and then play together. And that's why we chose Voss Kvike for all of our strains.
Well, you certainly proved in that Toon Dip that you know how to balance them. All right, our next most popular question comes from Michael. And Michael this one goes to you, Chris. Is Rhinegeist exploring the use of Kvike yeast?
We are a little bit. This, I don't know if you can see, this is Cloud Harvest. It's a sort of juicy IPA series that we're doing. That one is the first edition of that series. It uses Conan, but the next one that'll be coming out, Cloud Harvest 2, later in May. It's May now, apparently. That next one actually uses Voss, and then we actually use Voss in our wit beer. We really like it. We didn't want an overly phenolic wit beer. We wanted something really approachable, more on the fruit side. So we have some coriander in the beer, along with lemon and orange peel, but we use that Voss Kvike as the yeast, and it just brings enough complexity that it fits as a wit beer. But it's not overly phenolic, and hearing Mark talk about kind of the different strains. I mean, that's those Kvike strains. They're all over the place. So you really have to experiment and play around with them. And we've been doing a lot of that. But those are kind of the big ones. We've done some tap room only stuff, playing around with a few different strains. But then bringing that into Wiffle, actually I have to give a little bit of a shout out. I did a collab in Raleigh with the guys at Trophy. I grew up in Raleigh, in North Carolina, and I was having a conversation with Les, who's one of their I think he's their director of operations. I don't know what his official title is, but we were talking about the beer, and we were kind of, as you do, we're talking back and forth about wit beer, and they have a year-round wit beer, and we were talking about it, and he was like, "Yeah, ours uses Kvike yeast." And I was like, "No way." And I was like, we it was both one of those, like, we were like, "Oh yeah, I really like your wit beer." It's like, yeah, they're pretty damn similar. But
Wow.
but yeah, it's a cool way to play around. It's like this, it's a whole different direction you can go when doing recipe development, which is really fun.
All right. Chris has got the next question, but it goes to Mark. So Chris asks, Mark, can you tell us a bit more about the dip hopping method?
Sure. So, dip hopping is just another kind of continued rabbit hole that we always go down in hop oils and terpenoids and biotransformation with transformation positive yeast strains, and what types of flavors we can produce in our IPAs. Just on a base of biotransformation, we love how if we can take those classic dry hopped juicy IPA flavors and activate a little bit of biotransformation, where we can get geraniol to convert to a little bit of linalool, or even or citronellol and linalool to convert into some terpenol. Like, you create hop flavors that are new and complex and maybe unfamiliar, and it adds just a really fun depth to that beer, where sometimes the types of hops that we want to use, we love Citra, but we have to be careful about how many times we use Citra in an IPA. But so if we do that with different hopping techniques, or dip hopping, or versus double dry hopping, or different yeast strains that activate different dry hopping, that lets us take Citra and present it in multiple different ways and pull out all the different flavors that are potential in that. So with the dip hopping, like I said, that's an idea that comes out of Japan. And there's a lot of interesting research that's come out of Japan. Like Sapporo did some work on, Citra hops versus coriander, and whether that would produce a similar flavor. And looking at like those Form MP flavors in hops, and then this seems to be the next evolution of with the dip hopping, with that off of a boil contact with hops and wort. What type of oils and terpenoids are you able to make active, and then get to be soluble, and not volatilize off in the hops prior to us introducing a hop strain that's going to do significant biotransformation to those chemicals. So that's why we chose a hop profile on this, which is Citra, Mosaic, and El Dorado, something that we use heavily in other beers. But this beer tastes nothing like our normal Citra Mosaic IPA that uses our London Ale strain, which is pure mango pineapple. This is all orange, and a lot of that I think has to do with those hop compounds that we're giving or changing to give to that yeast through dip hopping, and then the Kvike yeast, to see how that transforms those. And that's like I said, there's some science on it, and there's a whole lot of mystery, and that we love.
I just love El Dorado hops. I just find them to be just one of the most awesome hops out there. I remember I had an IPA, and it was the best one I'd had to date. And I asked the guy what was in it. He said lots and lots of El Dorado, and it made a memory for me. It was kind of like, it is just a phenomenal hop.
Yeah, and that's what what we were trying to do with this beer, is to choose two geraniol rich hops. Our Mosaic and Citra are really rich in geraniol. And then El Dorado and Amarillo, pretty significant linalool content. And those are the two biotransformation compounds we were just really trying to pack this wort with. And I always get, like I said, we wanted to play that orange aspect into this beer, and I love the marmalade side rather than bright citrus part of El Dorado, and I love how it turned out.
Yeah, then I found out they weren't cheap.
No.
You know, I'd say that there was one hop about 2 years ago that we fell in love with, which was Belma, and we loved it because it was a unique hop, and we started using it and everything. And then we said, for the first time ever, we finally found a cheap hop, and we should have shut our mouths about that, because us and a bunch of other people, the word got out, and now that's just as expensive as everything else. Should have bought our contracts before we said that.
Well,
We did that with we had a beer that we haven't made in probably 2 or 3 years, but it was a Nelsoven heavy pale ale, and regardless of the expense, as we grew, we were like, we got this beer. It was called Fiction. And we were like, we loved it. And we went to up our contracts as we were growing, and they were like, no, there was none.
Good luck.
Yeah. And we were like, okay, we can do two things. We can either try to grab a box here, a box there from all different lots, and it won't be consistent, or we can just say, Fiction, we love you, we miss you. Maybe one day we'll make you again. But that's what we decided to do, because it was, same deal. We were like, I think when we emailed our hops guys, and we're like, so we're thinking this many hops, this many pounds of Nelson. And I think after they picked the phone up after laughing at us hysterically, told us that wasn't going to happen.
All right. Andrew asked the next question. And Chris, why don't you run with this for starters? But we want to hear what Mark's answer is too. What is the gateway beer for someone new to craft beer? Would Zango or Toon Dip be a good choice?
I think it depends on where you're coming from. One of the things I think about a lot as someone who does a lot of education for Rhinegeist, if someone is a wine drinker, then or a cider drinker, Zango is probably a great way to move in. If you're a coffee drinker, black coffee drinker, you probably want to try some IPAs and focus on that bitterness. I think it's really important, and that's something that I honestly think one of the big successes of the craft brewing industry has been the knowledge in our tap rooms. And we have amazing staff, and I'm sure Drekker does too. And it's that conversation. Somebody comes in and they say, "Hey, I've never been here. What can I try? Can I try a flight? Can I try a few things?" Or they have that conversation and they can say, "Oh, I don't like sweet," or "I do like sweet," or whatever they like, and then that server can say, "Oh, I got it. This is what you need to try," and it provides that positive experience with somebody. Nobody wants to feel like they don't know, and it's hard. Yeah. It's hard to say I don't know, and when you walk in somewhere and say I don't know what to get, when you're greeted with somebody who wants to help and not just no, tell me what you want, give me whatever, then that's that positive experience, and people keep coming back. And I think that the craft industry has done a good job with that. So, I think
I've always equated the craft industry to a bit like a Chinese menu, except you don't even have the knowledge of whether it's beef or chicken or shrimp. It's a Chinese menu without even that much.
We use
industry. We need
it's a tough balance. When you're writing a beer description, you're on the can or whatever, right? Like, you want to give enough information so that the 15-year, Grandmaster BJCP judge homebrewer gets the information they need, but also my Aunt Jean can pick it up and have some clue of if she's going to like it, right? And that's a tough balance.
Well, Mark, how about you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think that maybe personally, just with what I've seen at festivals or in our own tap room, I've maybe lost an idea of what a gateway beer is. I think I used to have this idea that there was maybe a pathway that people could follow, maybe out of flavorless macro and into, the diverse world of craft. But I think where I'm at now is just, if you have something that you like, just drink what you like and drink it with thought and purpose and kind of exploration. And then if something else comes to you or you're presented with an experience, try that and see what that opens up for you. I would say that some of the best tasting experiences I've had have been in styles that I necessarily didn't love. But when I approached that style in a situation where maybe I was hearing from a brewer about what they did with that beer or the inspiration behind it, and I opened my mind up a little bit more to it, all of a sudden that beer changed and I was in. So I would say, just drink what you like and then look for those experiences and how you can get into that beer and be open-minded and thoughtful as you're drinking it. And I think that the preconceived notions that you set for yourself before you drink a beer are really going to impact how that beer affects you. So, really approaching that from aroma and what are you picking up, and flavor and what are you picking up, and if you want to be bold and try a strange new beer for you, don't just knock that thing back and take a sip and see what grabs you first. It's usually going to be the most aggressive flavor that gets you, but be thoughtful and kind of go along on the experience. And if you liked it, great. Now you've got a new style. If you didn't, don't write it off. Just come back to it at a different time when it seems to present itself. And that's the great thing about craft beer right now, is that we're making beers that we're being accused of blasphemy and that it's not even beer anymore. And I think that's the greatest thing about it, is that if we make it, it's beer. That's the definition of a brewery. But there is so many new and crazy ways for you to try and experience a beer beverage, and just go with it.
All right, we're almost at the top of the hour, and some people may have only allocated an hour. So we'll do the rest of the questions kind of rapid fire, if you don't mind. Yes.
No, I was doing the guns. I'm ready for rapid fire.
Oh. Okay. So, Mark, remember, we're rapid fire. This one is for you. I just received my new shirt, Presumptuous Wannabe Cosmopolitan Hacks. Do you guys plan on naming a beer after the message on your Instagram account?
I don't know if we're going to name a beer. We're just so in love with the titles. So I think we're just going to keep those titles for ourselves. There might be more merchandise or glassware, but we don't have a real good plan. But what I can promise you is that none of that stuff is going to die. That's going to be with us forever. That's part of us now.
Thank you, Roy. I love that question. So, Andres, the next one is for you, Chris. How do you come up with new fruited ale flavors? Where did Zango recipe come from?
Yeah. Just to keep it quick, we have a crew at the brewery that we kind of do weekly sort of development meetings, and we decided we wanted to do a series. So we kind of have a release date in mind, and that's really what guides what we want to do. The one before Zango was called Slangria. That was pomegranate, blueberry, and lime. Very kind of fall, very food forward, almost like pomegranate's super weird. It's like pie crusty and vanilla. But
yeah, I saw that slant. I thought it was a typo.
yeah. And then it's very and then after Zango we have a pineapple and passion fruit, which is just super middle of the summer, right? And so that's kind of it brings some seasonality and what we think fits the season, and legitimately it involves we go out and we get juice, and we sit in the tasting lab and we mix up different concoctions, and it's like one of those, I don't know, things that you could never do during the pandemic, but we're like, oh, this one, try this, passing around, like, what do you think about that? And like, too much blueberry or
It sounds like y'all are having way too much fun.
It's very serious. It's not fun at all. They're definitely not, Thursday afternoon, Friday afternoon type meetings. But yeah, I mean, we look to find flavors that we get excited about. And sometimes it means sometimes we get really close. Actually, Zango was almost a different citrus. And we're kind of right on the edge, and we were like, it's not quite there. And then somebody said the word tangerine, and that was like, boom, got it. That was it. That was the difference we needed.
All right. Remember, we're rapid firing this. So
I know that wasn't very rapid. I'm terrible.
It wasn't. You got the next question, though. What kind of apples did you use in Zango?
Culinary.
Culinary? What? That is.
I was going for real rapid. Culinary. They're called culinary or dessert apples. We actually our juice is a blend, and the varieties change slightly so that we get consistent sugar, acid, tannin profile throughout the year. But they're all the apples that you would find at your grocery store. Red Delicious, Gala, Fuji, Honeycrisp. It's all that's what I mean by culinary. They're not cider apples. They're not like Arkansas Black or Pippin or anything like that.
Well, thank you. I learned something new.
All from Pacific Northwest.
All right. Our next one is for both Mark, you, and Chris. Mark, why don't you go first? What are your favorite aspects of your beers?
I would say in Toon Dip, I really love how the orange character and that deep oily orange notes came through, and then there's something strange, something unfamiliar behind there, and I attribute that to some of those, whether that was the dip hop or biotransformation flavors, but there's a complexity to it that I'm just always searching to try and find what that is, and I haven't rested on that yet.
Chris?
Yeah,
favorite aspects of your beers.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that I think is really good is at the brewery we do a pretty good job of not letting one or two people drive what we make. And I don't mean that that's necessarily bad, but we have almost 300 employees, and we've had ideas come from all over the place. And these sort of hazy IPAs would be a good example. There was a good chunk of our brewing team has kind of been doing this for a while, and we were very grumpy about it for a little while, to say the least. Like IPA, our flagship is a West Coast IPA, and we were like, IPA is clear and it's bitter, and some of the other people in the brewery were like, no. I mean, yes, but no. And I think our ability to listen to that and try and experiment, Mark talked about this, right? Like you just try stuff, and sometimes you're really surprised by what comes out. And I think that's, I'm drinking a quote unquote hazy IPA right now. And that's something that, 7 or 8 years ago, I would have never imagined doing. And I'm glad that I am.
Did you say 300 employees?
I did.
Wow. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. So we self-distribute in Cincinnati and Columbus. So we have, a big sales force and distribution and warehouse. And then we have a 25,000 square foot tap room plus a rooftop bar. So we probably have 50
amazing rooftop bar.
Yeah, we probably have 50 or 60 people that just work in the tap room. And I don't mean just work in the tap room. They're our front line. So
well, you're making us all want to travel. Mark's got this gorgeous tap room with high ceilings and beautiful woodwork, and you've got the amazing view. So, all right, I'm not doing too good on the rapid fire. Okay, so we are 5 questions. Let's run through these. Chris, who is responsible for art, design, and label logo design at Rhinegeist? I love the minimalistic yet colorful style.
Yeah, I can do this rapid fire. So our original logo was because it happened before the brewery opened. It was part of the development and design planning that was done by Helm's Workshop, and then all of our art and design and cans since then are in-house. Remember I said 300 employees. So we don't use any marketing or branding agencies. We do everything in-house. So we have designers and marketing folks that are coming up with concept, design, art, everything in-house.
All right. This is a question for both of you. Mark, why don't you start? Lynn asks, where did you get your brewing experience from to become a professional brewer? Remember, rapid fire.
Sure. Well, like I said, my background is in a lot of biochemistry and microbiology, and so brewing or fermentation studies or like single cell organism yeast days were anytime when you could do beer as the practical application, that was the best part of that semester or the lab work. So I was always working on different things in the lab or bringing in homebrew samples and then analyzing and working on that just in my undergrad and graduate work. And then, like I said, I apprenticed at Colorado Boy Brewery in Ridgeway, Colorado, where I gained some more, I'd say, not just working knowledge in a brewery, but how to start a brewery where, you might know how to use a piece of equipment or, run a glycol system, but how do you build a glycol system? And so that's what that apprenticeship really focused on. And that's where I got some of that background education.
Chris, how about you? Rapid fire.
Yeah, I always say that I got into this the old-fashioned way by just drinking beer and then deciding I needed to figure out how to make it at home. And then I worked at my first professional brewing job. A little shout-out was a place that's no longer with us, but in North Carolina called Mystery Brewing. It was in Hillsborough.
I know Mystery.
Yeah.
Been there quite a few times.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I was employee number one. It was me and Eric down there for a long time.
I had seen that. I know Eric well. I'm sorry they're not around.
Yeah.
All right. Next one. This is for both of you. Rapid fire. So, Mark, why don't you plan to answer first? What are your beers named after?
Are we talking this beer or any of our beers?
I'll let you pick your answer. Whatever's
sure,
rapid.
Well, yeah. Like I said, Toon Dip is named after, because of that dip hopping technique, we really named it after that Roger Rabbit, the Toon Dip acid that they used to murder those cartoons in.
Chris, what are your beers named after?
All sorts of stuff. Zango is just kind of a almost a portmanteau of sort of, zing and mango, sort of citrusy zing and mango. But yeah, we have our names kind of come from all over the place. We have a few different naming conventions, but they tend to be kind of short, relatively short, couple syllables.
I think Zango's particularly catchy.
We like it.
Yeah.
Zango.
All right. Next question comes from Matthew. Received a beer via trade from Drekker last week. It is amazing. Live in Maryland and would love to have more or half. Matthew wants a hat.
Me too.
So yeah, I'd say one of the busiest things our taproom crew is doing right now is they're fulfilling all the online orders, which is turned into like a full-time job for our store right now. There's a lot of merch going out in packages.
Well, and I see you've got one of those hats on.
Yeah, I think we just released these Wednesday, so I gotta put on the new one. It's like a new toy for us.
For an extra $50, you can get a game-worn signed Drekker hat from Mark.
All right, Heather asks our last and most important question. What was each of your gateway beers, and what are your current go-tos? And Mark, why don't you start?
You know, I would say that I'm gonna take the easy, or I'm gonna cut on that one a little bit, because I know there's a brew pub that I can think of which really got excited about craft beer styles, but Surly was the brewery, and I think Furious was the beer that really changed my mind about how you could take a traditional style and then totally throw that to the wind, use it as an inspiration point, but then make that beer whatever you want it to be. And Furious was this not really a double, too malty for a normal IPA, way too hoppy for not being like a single, something like that. And at the time that came out, that was just a mashup, strange, creative beer. And that really opened my eyes to like what you could do with a beer style. And that was it for me.
Okay, and there was a second part. What's your current go-to? Quickly.
My favorite crusher all the time is Modest False Pattern. Just hoppy, fluffy, and ultra sessionable.
I do like the session beers. All right, Chris, you're next.
Yeah, I would.
Gateway beer and current go-to.
Yeah, when I first got into drinking beer, it was in North Carolina, and we had a 6% ABV cap. So we had pretty limited craft options. But a couple of the biggest ones for me, and they're still near and dear to my heart, is Dogfish Head 60 Minute and Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. A lot of breweries weren't sending beer to North Carolina due to that. And then eventually we got things, Foothills made some really awesome stuff. They had a stout called Total Eclipse. It was an American stout. It was awesome. And it really kind of got me into that. And then current stuff, I've been really, really digging on, I teach a lot of Cicerone training classes. And so I spend a lot of time in classic examples from Europe. And I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out to the Schlenkerla Helles smoked beer. I love it so much. It's one of my favorites. But as far as something from the U.S., and I wish we don't get it in Ohio or Kentucky. So Allagash, hook me up. Allagash White is still just, it's a beautiful, beautiful beer, and I love it so much.
Chris says, hellish yes.
Yeah, hell yeah.
All right, guys, that's our last question. We're going to wrap things up here just briefly. Hang on for just a minute because I want to hear kind of some closing thoughts. But I did want to mention to everybody that there is, I mentioned at the beginning of the show that there's a special offer for new Beer Buyer Club members. If you use coupon code B as in boy, C as in cat, or Beer Connoisseur 2020, you'll receive $10 credit after spending your first $25. So the coupon code is B as in boy, C as in cat 2020. And there's a good reason to consider that because these will continue. We have one scheduled for next week. We're going to have Michael Frankowitz, the head brewer at Fort George Brewery, Dan Cady, the head brewer from Meckler Brewing in San Diego, and Jeremy Roberts, who's the founder of 903 Brewers. So, gentlemen, as we wrap up, and this is our inaugural event, do you have a closing thought on your thoughts on doing a guided tasting on some amazing beers?
Well, like I said, I really appreciate you having me on here. This was a fun experience, and I said, there's a signing to, I think, the situation that we're all in, and this was a creative way that I would not have thought of for a group of 100 and some people to connect and share a beer together and talk about them. And really thank you for putting that on. And I hope things like this continue and we keep some of these connections after the world goes back to something like normal. So thanks for putting that on, and thanks for inviting me. This was great.
Well, Chris, Henry says, excellent presentation, gentlemen. Cheers from Lebanon, Illinois. So, Chris, do you have a closing thought?
Yeah, I mean, Mark really hit it on the head. We're looking to find connection these days, and what a great way to connect with people from all over. Just looking through the chat, there's people from all over the country, and that's not something I normally get to do. So it's been really fun. I really enjoy. I definitely. I know we mentioned it before we went on air, but we definitely need to make sure that the opposite hosts get the beers from the other places. So I'm gonna have to send Mark an email here after this, but
we'll hook up a little trade.
Yeah, we'll make something happen.
Well, that does sound like even more fun. Well, to the audience and everybody that's here, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun and just really a blast for me. And what a privilege, again, to talk to two microbiologists, whizzes who also brew fantastic beer, and what a blast. So for everybody, I hope you have a good rest of the week and the weekend as we're starting, and we'll look forward to catching you next Friday. So bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Skål.